Now to an incredible find overseas, an elaborate series of stone monuments believed to have been hidden for thousands of years, not far from the famous site of Stonehenge.
Now, a new analysis shows that the 6-ton iconic altar stone at the heart of Stonehenge originated from northeastern Scotland.
For 5,000 years, Stonehenge has refused to explain itself. Every civilization that came to study it walked away with a theory and a shrug. So in 2026, researchers stopped guessing and fed the entire site to an AI. Every scan, every measurement, every survey ever taken, and told it to find what human eyes had missed.
Compare the chemistry of this rock against samples from across southern Britain where sarsen stones also occur. And by doing that, we're able to identify a direct chemical match.
What it returned is the part nobody can account for. The numbers do not describe a primitive monument built by Neolithic farmers. They describe something far more precise, far more deliberate, and far older in its knowledge than anyone is ready to explain. The impossible monument. Start with where it sits. Stonehenge stands on the windswept chalk plains of Salisbury, England, 90 miles southwest of London, rising out of flat farmland in a way that has bothered people for centuries. Not because it's beautiful, though it is, because it shouldn't be standing there at all.
I was surprised to know that Westwards was the match for all bar 2 of Stonehenge's sarsens.
Look at what it's made of. The outer ring is built from enormous sarsen stones, each one more than 20 feet high, each weighing around 25 tons, dragged from Marlborough Downs, roughly 20 miles north, and capped with horizontal lintels locked together with real joints. Mortise and tenon and tongue and groove, the kind you'd cut into a piece of furniture, carved here into solid rock by people who supposedly had no metal to cut with. Inside that ring sit the blue stones, smaller music, but still up to 4 tons each. And those came from the Preseli Hills of Wales, 140 miles away. No metal tools, no wheels that could carry that weight, no cranes. Sit with that for a second, because it's the piece everyone glosses over. Modern engineers with hydraulics and steel, and a full crew still sweat over moving a single 25-ton precision-cut stone. The textbook answer has always been log rollers, music rope, earth and ramps, and a lot of patient trial and error. And it has always quietly buckled under the weight of what actually got built on this plane. And think about that Welsh trip for a second. 140 miles over hills and rivers, hauling 4-ton blocks with rope and muscle and whatever they could float. People have spent entire careers arguing about how. Nobody argues about whether, because the stones are sitting right there. They made the trip, and the question Grok kept circling wasn't how they moved them. It was why those exact stones were worth moving at all. Here's the detail that should bother you more than the weight, though. For most of history, nobody even believed Neolithic farmers did this. Medieval writers handed the whole thing to Merlin and to giants because the monument looked like the work of something bigger than the people who lived on that plane. We laughed that off the moment radiocarbon dating pinned the real age.
We now know where these stones come from, and that means we can ask new questions. Which route did they bring them over?
Grok's analysis does something uncomfortable with that old instinct. It doesn't bring back the giants. It brings back the feeling that we have been badly underestimating whoever did build this. And the part that makes the simple story worse, not better, is the timeline. This wasn't one heroic push. It went up in phases from 3000 BCE to 2000 BCE. First, a circular ditch and bank, then 56 strange pits we now call the Aubrey Holes, then the towering sarsen trilithons, then the bluestones moved and removed into arrangements nobody has ever fully explained. And then, around 1600 BCE, the whole thing was shut down. Shut down, not abandoned. And that distinction is going to matter more than you think by the time we reach the end. You've heard the version everyone grows up with. Neolithic farmers built it through faith, muscle, and generations of effort. Simple, human, done. That version just walked into 5,000 years of data and a system that doesn't blink, and it didn't survive the first chapter. The question. So, here's what they actually did in 2026. A research team pulled together the most complete Stonehenge data set anyone has ever assembled. Every measurement, every survey, every geological scan, every astronomical calculation run on the site across 300 years of study. Petabytes of it, more than any single human could ever hold in their head. 300 years of study sounds impressive until you see how scattered it is. Every generation of archaeologists measured the place with the tools they had, argued with the generation before them, and left behind notebooks full of numbers nobody ever lined up against everything else. No human could. A career is too short and the pile is as too deep. That's the whole point of handing it to a machine. For the first time, every number the site has ever given up sat in one place, in one mind, at one moment, getting checked against all the others. All of it went into Grok, the AI built by Elon Musk's company xAI, trained across physics, engineering, astronomy, archaeology, and pattern recognition. The instruction was almost insultingly simple. Look at everything. Find what the humans, studying one fragment at a time, kept missing. And they were careful about how they asked. They didn't tell Grok to confirm a favorite theory or pick a winner among the camps that have argued over this place for a century. They told it to come in with no loyalty to anyone and report only what the numbers themselves demanded. That part matters.
One of the most recognizable monoliths of the late Neolithic period. Built some 5,000 years ago, there are still questions about its origin and purpose.
A person looks for what they already half expect. Grok was told to look for whatever was actually there. What's strange is where it started. A human walks up to Stonehenge and looks at the stones because the stones are the whole point, the thing on every postcard. Grok didn't. It went for the holes first, the part everyone treats as set dressing. And the reason it started there turned out to be the first clue that it was reading this site by a logic nobody had used on it before. The 56 pits. The Aubrey holes are 56 pits set in a ring just inside the outer earthwork. They were spotted back in the 17th century and named after the antiquarian John Aubrey. And for 300 years, they were treated as background. A few held cremated remains, some sat empty, and the uneven gaps between them got written off as sloppy work. Neolithic people doing their best with antler picks. Nothing to see. Grok tore that apart on the first pass. Watch what it did. It took the compiled survey data and measured the spacing between all 56 holes down to fractions of a millimeter. Then plotted the distance between every consecutive pair around the full circle. The random scatter everyone assumed would be there, gone. Instead, the spacing traced a clean, repeating wave, a sinusoidal curve. And that curve matched almost exactly the equation that describes how the moon's orbit shifts across the 18.6-year lunar nodal cycle. The gaps between the holes encode the moon's maximum and minimum declination as it swings through that entire 18.6-year period. Dr. Jennifer Walsh was the astronomer they brought in to check it. The way it's told, she was at her monitor when the spacing data finally resolved on screen and the points settled into that wave and she stopped typing. She ran it again. Then she put it in her report in plain language. The correlation between the Aubrey hole spacing and lunar orbital mechanics is statistically overwhelming and the probability of it happening by chance is effectively zero. Think about what that's actually saying. This isn't a lucky sight line you could find by watching the horizon on a good night. This is orbital mechanics converted into physical distance accurate to centimeters laid out around a circle 100 m wide. Somebody 5,000 years ago understood moon moves at a level Western science didn't formally write down until Kepler in the 17th century, and they recorded it in chalk. Then Grok answered the question that had hung over those pits for centuries. Why 56? Why that exact number? Because 56 is 3 times the lunar nodal cycle. 18.6 times 3 is 55.8 rounded, and you get 56. The ring is a triple cycle lunar calculator, a machine for tracking the moon across 3 complete nodal periods. 56 years of sky held in the ground.
The fact that we now know that Stonehenge was part of a much larger superstructure indicates to me that we've only barely scratched the surface.
Quick thing before we go deeper. If a ring of holes turning out to be a working lunar computer already has your attention, hit subscribe now because the holes are the gentlest thing Grok found here. What's coming next makes a calendar buried in the ground look almost ordinary. And this is the point where it stops being archaeology. And here's what it costs to even gather the raw numbers behind that curve. To trace the moon's full swing, somebody had to watch its rising and setting points across the better part of 2 decades, holding every earlier reading against the present sky, accurate enough to catch a shift most people would never notice. That's not one observer. That's a chain of them, handing the work down person to person for most of a lifetime before a single pit was ever cut. The pattern in the ground is the end of a project that started a generation earlier in somebody's memory. And once it's cut into the chalk, it never stops working. The moon doesn't have to be out. The people who built it don't have to be alive. The whole calculation is frozen into the spacing, still running 5,000 years later, still correct, just waiting for someone to walk up with the right tools and notice it was never an accident. That's the difference between watching the sky and building a model of it. One ends when the clouds roll in, the other ends when the stones do. Because the moment Grok turned from the holes to the standing stones, the Aubrey holes, as strange as they are, were about to look almost simple. The sound machine. Grok took every measurement of the sarsen stones, positions, heights, orientations, the density of the rock, the curve of the circle, the exact seat of every lintel, and ran acoustic simulations on the finished monument. Every stone upright, every lintel in place, the way it stood when it was whole. Here's what it came back, complete. Stonehenge behaves like a resonant cavity, a three-dimensional space engineered to shape sound. The geometry forces standing waves at specific frequencies, and the strongest of them sit in the infrasound range between 95 and 120 Hz. Now, stay with me because this is the detail that changes the whole thing. That frequency band is below what you can consciously hear. Stand inside and your ears register nothing, but your body does. Modern research has confirmed that infrasound between 95 and 120 Hz can trigger altered states of consciousness, intense emotional surges, visual hallucinations, real physiological changes, shifts in heart rate, neural patterns tied to trance. The builders shaped this place to produce those exact frequencies when sound was made inside the ring. Dr. Marcus Chin was the acoustic engineer they pulled in to validate it. He ran the simulation himself at his own workstation, fully expecting to find the flaw that would explain it away, and watching the standing wave map light up instead clearly rattled him. His verdict was blunt. The precision needed to pull off effects like these is remarkable. Today, acoustic engineers hit targets like that with heavy math and computer modeling. Stonehenge does it with arranged rock, and the tell that it's deliberate is repeatability. An accidental echo is a quirk of one room on one day. This is a frequency band the geometry produces every time from different sound sources, locked to the same range with the strongest effect landing on fixed points in the floor. Accidents don't aim. This aims. Picture standing in that circle while it worked. Drums, voices, whatever they brought, feeding the stones. You wouldn't hear the layer underneath, the 95 to 120 Hz hum, but you'd feel it in your chest, behind your eyes, in the part of the mind that decides whether a place is sacred or just stone. To anyone inside who didn't understand the mechanism, and almost nobody could have, this wouldn't have registered as architecture. It would have felt like presence, like the place itself was alive and reaching for them. And it gets stranger. Grok found the acoustic field isn't even its spikes. The AI pinpointed exact spots inside the circle, nodes, where the infrasound effect would hit hardest. Then it cross-checked those spots against the archaeological record. They line up with the places where cremated human remains were found. That's not a coincidence you can wave off. If those bodies were scattered at random, fine, geometry doing its thing. But they're not scattered. They cluster on the precise points the simulation flagged as most intense. Somebody knew where the force peaked, and somebody chose to put the dead right there. And that reframes every burial on the site.
So how could you have moved these into place? How could you have moved them from Wales, where the bluestones, the spotted dolerite, came from within Stonehenge?
We'd always read them as honored dead laid to rest in a holy place. Grok's map says something colder. They sit on the hot spots. The exact coordinates where the monument did the most to a living body are the exact coordinates where bodies ended up. Maybe that's where the ceremony placed its most important people. Maybe it's where the ceremony was most dangerous. The stones won't tell us which. Whether they died there from natural causes in the middle of an overwhelming ceremony or from long exposure to something they could feel but never name, the data can't say. But on one point, Grok is not vague at all. This was not a quiet place of worship. It was running technology built to reach into human consciousness and change it. And the bluestones hauled 140 miles out of Wales where it strings. The singing stones, which finally cracks open a question archaeologists have thought about for decades. Why those stones from that one spot in Wales drag that absurd distance? Grok's answer has nothing to do with transport. It's about sound. The AI ran the petrographic data on every bluestone, and the pattern was hard to miss. They were chosen for how they ring. Strike bluestone and it sings. A clear, long tone, and different stones ring at different pitches depending on size, shape, and mineral content. These weren't grabbed at random from a Welsh quarry. Grok found they were selected to build a harmonic series, tones locked together by precise mathematical intervals that any musician would recognize as a pentatonic scale, the same 5-note scale that shows up independently in ancient musical traditions all over the world. And it means somebody on that team had an ear, not just an engineer or an astronomer, but someone who could stand in a Welsh quarry, strike a slab, and hear whether it belonged in the chord. A pentatonic scale isn't noise. It's structure, intervals chosen so the tones agree. The same skeleton under melodies and cultures that never once met. They built that agreement into a pile of rocks, then carried the rocks across a country to assemble it. They were tuning the monument before the monument existed, and their placement is just as deliberate. Grok worked out that each blue stone sits on a specific acoustic node relative to the sarsen ring. When the sarsens generate that low infrasound resonance, the blue stones at those nodes vibrate in sympathy. The big ring lays down the fundamental. The blue stones stack the harmonics on top. Together they build a tuned acoustic environment aimed straight at the human body, and sympathy is the right word for it physically. Hit the right fundamental, and a tuned object across the room starts to vibrate on its own with nobody touching it. Build a ring of stones around that effect, and you get a structure that seems to answer when you make sound inside it, swelling, sustaining, coming back at you out of the rock. To the people standing in it, the stones would have sounded alive. Think about what that means in in practice. Somebody walked into the hills of Wales, struck individual rocks, listened, tested them, and kept only the ones that hit the pitches they wanted, then moved those exact stones 140 miles. That's not blind devotion. That's quality control on a finely tuned instrument, which leaves one conclusion, and it's a big one. The whole thing was designed as a single acoustic and astronomical system before a single stone move. The bluestone selection, the sarsen placement, the orientation, all decided together as one plan. You don't back into that by accident across 20 generations. Somebody started with a blueprint, and a blueprint means somebody already knew before the first measurement how stone carries sound, how the moon travels, and how a ring of rock works on the nervous system. Where does that knowledge come from? The simple story has no answer. The stones just assume it. And that question, where they already knew all this, is the thread Grok pulled next. Except it didn't pull it at Stonehenge. It pulled it out of the ground for miles in every direction around it. Planned from above. Everything so far, the lunar calculator, the sound machine, the tuned stones, turns out to be the surface. When Grok widened out to the landscape, the whole frame flipped. Stonehenge isn't the project. It's the centerpiece of something far bigger. And that bigger thing came first. They fed Grok LiDAR surveys, geophysical maps, and archaeological records covering several square miles around the monument. And the picture rearranged itself. Stonehenge doesn't stand alone. It sits at the center of a connected network. Hundreds of features, earthwork enclosures, burial mounds, ceremonial avenues, timber circles, pit alignments, all arranged by geometric and astronomical relationships that Grok measured and confirmed. And the network isn't subtle once you see it. Hundreds of features scattered across miles of ground that looks empty to anyone standing in it. From the dirt, it's noise. From above, it's a single coordinated figure drawn at a scale no one standing on the ground could have perceived while they were drawing it. That figure had been lying there unread the entire time, and it took a machine looking at all of it at once to finally see the shape. Some burial mounds form precise geometric triangles with Stonehenge at the apex. Other earthworks run dead straight for kilometers. Timber circles mark specific astronomical events when you sight them from the monument. The entire landscape obeys one coordinated design. Lines like that don't happen on their own. Water finds a straight channel, sure, but burial mounds don't arrange themselves into triangles with a target kilometers away. That figure had been lying there unread the entire time, and it took a machine looking at all of it at once to finally see the shape. Some burial mounds form precise geometric triangles with Stonehenge at the apex. Other earthworks run dead straight for kilometers. Timber circles mark specific astronomical events when you sight them from the monument. The entire landscape obeys one coordinated design. Lines like that don't happen on their own. Water finds a straight channel, sure, but burial mounds don't arrange themselves into triangles with a target kilometers away. I turn my back on them and leave the circle, and I'm walking out towards Amesbury and the location of this grave, which is down here. Every one of those relationships is a decision made by someone who could fix a point on land they couldn't see from where they stood and trust it would fall exactly where the geometry needed it. Dr. Sarah Bradford spends her career on landscape scale patterns, and when she pulled up Grok's overlay, what stopped her cold was how obvious it looked once the AI drew the lines and how completely invisible it had been to everyone studying the sites one at a time. The AI surfaced patterns no human could catch that way, she said. Seen as a single system, the design principles challenge nearly everything we think we know about what Neolithic people could do. Here's the scale of it. Grok calculated the surveying accuracy you'd need to place monuments kilometers apart and still hold the geometry tight to a few meters. That's the kind of skill we usually file under classical Greece, nearly 2,500 years after Stonehenge. The LiDAR says these builders had it anyway. Try to picture doing this yourself. No aircraft, no satellites, no instrument to lock a precise angle. You're standing on one hill and you need to drop a marker on another hill kilometers away. When you can't even see from where you stand and get it right to within a few paces, then do it again and again until the whole region snaps into one clean figure. The only place that figure is legible from is directly overhead, and that's the one place these builders could never stand. Then comes the part that bends the timeline. Grok found that some of the earthworks and mounds wired into this geometry were built between 3,500 BCE and 3000 BCE, 500 to 1,000 years before the Sarsen Circle went up. The landscape blueprint existed first. Stonehenge was added later, dropped into a geometric plan that was already there. So somebody sketched the master design around 3,500 BCE and started laying it into the ground. And their descendants, across 20 to 25 generations, kept executing it accurately enough to finish with no writing, or none we found. Grok checked that against the limits of oral tradition. Even the steadiest oral traditions on record, Vedic hymns, Homeric epics, drift measurably over centuries. What this landscape demands is transmission tighter than anything documented in human history. The knowledge held exact and usable across 500 years. How? The data won't say, and whoever whoever first drew this never saw it finished. A single mind could hold a design this big, sure, but this design outlived that mind by centuries. It got carried forward by people born into a plan already half-built, who added their one piece and died long before the next went down. Faithful to an intention not one of them had personally formed. That's not a construction project. That's a 500-year act of obedience to a blueprint that was never written down. And when Grok stopped looking at the plan and started looking at the order, the stones were actually cut and raised. The how got even worse, because the people doing the building weren't carrying a tradition at its peak. They were carrying one that was already coming apart in their hands. Knowledge slipping away. Grok ran the radiocarbon dates, the architectural relationships, and the stratigraphic sequence across the entire build. And the result runs backward against everything you'd expect. The earliest arrangements are the most precise. The first bluestone layouts show the deepest grasp of harmonics. The first sarsen trilithons hit the strongest acoustic resonance. And then it slips. Later stones land in positions that weaken the sound. Later alignments drift off true. You know how this normally goes. A culture gets better at things over time. Each generation a little sharper. Stonehenge does the exact opposite. Peaks at the start and declines from there. These builders weren't inventing something. They inherited it. And the inheritance was already fading while they worked. The numbers nail it down. Early stones sit an average of 3.2 centimeters off the acoustically perfect position. Later stones miss by 12.7 centimeters. Generation by generation, the grip loosens. And 3.2 against 12.7 isn't just sloppier hands. It's the gap between someone who knows why a stone goes exactly there and someone who only remembers that it should go roughly there. The first is understanding. The second is a copy of understanding thinning with every pass. Like a song carried across too many generations until the words survive, but the meaning's gone. Flip the usual story in your head. We picture the deep past as the dim part. Everyone's slowly getting cleverer on the way to us. The stones say the reverse. The sharpest hands here were the first ones. Everyone after was a student working from a master's example they admired and couldn't equal. And the distance between the example and the copy grew wider every century. They weren't a people discovering how to do this. They were a people forgetting it. Grok caught the same decline in the tool marks. It flagged different working techniques on the same stones separated by what weathering suggests could be decades or centuries. Stones partly shaped, set down, then returned to and finished with cruder methods by someone who clearly didn't understand the first hand's work. Picture one block carrying two signatures, a master's and an apprentice's who came along generations later and couldn't match it. And the early work is genuinely hard to match. The contact surfaces show curvature variations under 2 millimeters across 50 centimeter spans, metal work tolerances achieved in raw stone with stone tools. Experimental archaeology teams have spent months trying to reproduce it and gotten rough approximations at best. The first builders pulled off something we still can't. Their own descendants couldn't either. Line that comparison up for a second. Teams today with steel tools, power equipment, published technique, and all the time they want produce a rough copy. People with antler and stone and a fading memory of how, working 4,000 years earlier, produced the original those modern teams are failing to match. The arrow of skill is pointing the wrong way and Grok says it has been the whole time. We just never had a system patient enough to line up every stone and prove it. And the decline has a shape you can date. Grok could rank the stones not just by where they sit, but by how well whoever placed them understood the system. And that ranking tracks the radiocarbon dates almost perfectly. The better the acoustics, the older the work. The cruder the fit, the later it came. Time runs one way here, and understanding runs the other. The clock and the competence are moving in opposite directions, and that is the part nobody has a clean explanation for. So, this isn't a civilization climbing toward knowledge, it's one sliding away from it, which leaves the question Grok raised and couldn't close. What exactly was being lost? And why did holding on to it matter so much that its keepers built the most permanent thing they could imagine just to keep it from disappearing? The final transmission. Because the last thing that happened at Stonehenge wasn't people walking away. When Grok laid all of it side by side, the lunar math in the holes, the sound engineering in the circle, the tuned bluestones, the landscape geometry, the alignments, the slow loss of precision, one thread ran through everything. Cycles. Every part of this place encodes cycles. Lunar cycles in the spacing of the pits, solar cycles in the line of the stones, acoustic cycles in the resonance, long slow precessional cycles in the stars. The whole monument is built to track patterns that repeat across spans from a single day to thousands of years. Grok confirmed the famous summer solstice alignment, then found 8 more that nobody had spotted. Lunar standstill extremes, stellar alignments that account for the precession of the equinoxes, cross-quarter day markers. 9 alignments in all with an average error under 0.3 degrees, hit roughly 5,000 years ago by methods we still can't reconstruct. And Walsh, going back through them, kept landing on the same unconscious uncomfortable point. Several of these don't mark a single night. They track cycles that take more than one human lifetime to watch from start to finish. And that's the question that doesn't let go. What runs on a clock that long? What's worth watching for thousands of years, encoding into stone so the watching can outlive everyone who started it? You don't build a 100M machine to remember when to plant a field. You build it for something that comes around slowly, rarely, and matters enough that forgetting it would be a catastrophe. Grok can see they were tracking it, cannot see what it was. And notice it isn't one clock, it's a stack of them running at once, days against years against the slow grind of precession that takes thousands of years just to come full circle. Whoever designed this wasn't tracking a single event. They were keeping several enormous clocks wound at the same time in the same monument, which means they were waiting on the moment those cycles lined up. Lined up to mean what? Grok can't say. Only that the machine was built to catch it. Grok's read on the closure around 1600 BCE comes the closest to an answer. And it's not what you'd guess. The final activity doesn't look like flight. Fallen stones were set down with care. Specific areas were deliberately covered with earth to protect buried features from erosion. The site was shut down in an orderly way by people who knew they couldn't maintain it anymore, but wanted it to survive intact for whoever came next. There's a specific kind of grief in that, if that's what it was. Not the panic of people fleeing, not the shrug of people who simply moved on. It's the care of someone packing away a thing too precious to break and too complex to keep running, sealing it against the weather, trusting it to strangers they would never meet, on the chance those strangers might one day be sharper than they had managed to stay. That's the move of people who can feel the knowledge slipping past them. People who can't pass on the full understanding, but can preserve the structure itself and bet that some later civilization will work out how to read it. We are that later civilization, and the thing doing the reading is Grok. 5,000 years after someone sealed this place into the ground and walked away. A system built by a company most of us know for cars and rockets sat down with every number the site has ever surrendered and started reading the language back. We are the strangers they trusted. This is how we're finally reading the note they left, and the note turns out to be mostly a question we still can't answer because what Grok found doesn't look like the beginning of human astronomical knowledge. It looks like the opposite, a last transmission. Knowledge already ancient, already fading, cut into the most durable medium there was because nothing softer would last long enough to carry it forward. The math is there, the astronomy is there, the acoustics, the geometry, all of it measured, quantified, confirmed. The only thing missing is where it came from and what long age of forgetting came before the people who raised these stones without fully understanding what they were building. Grok opened that question. Can't close it, but for the first time we've got the data to ask it right. And here's the part that should keep you up. Stonehenge isn't the only site where Grok is finding this exact fingerprint of fading knowledge. Subscribe so you're here when the next site goes into the system. Then drop a comment with the one ancient site you think should be fed in next, because once this pattern shows up in more than one place, it gets a lot harder to explain away than anyone is comfortable with.